start the recording now. By the way, if you're all happy that your image may appear in the recording, please just stay as you are. Otherwise, you may want to close your camera. This is something that I would like you to consider, because of course, as you have seen, we then publish our recordings for the benefit of others who are not here physically connected today. Physically, well, let's say in live transmission. Okay, so it's 1:04. Oh, here comes Eduardo. In the university, there is something they call the academic quarter of hour in Italy. That means the official time for the lesson is, say, 1 o'clock, but really they start at 1:15. And that is meant for people who are a bit late or take it easy. So, Hola Eduardo, bienvenido. Okay, so I guess we are almost ready to start. When I see Eduardo is able to hear and speak, then we get going. Hola Eduardo, ¿se escucha bien? Hello, hello. Can you hear me? I see Judy has temporarily vanished. Hope it's not an abduction, it's just a temporary thing. Okay, there she is. Eduardo, everything right with the audio? Can't hear anything from Mexico. Okay, I'll say let's get started. There may be some technical problem there, but I'm sure he will reconnect if necessary. This is our 5th lecture, and I'd like to briefly recap what is the story so far. We found that there is a real core within us that seldom manifests itself, but we can perceive, and we somehow know it's there now. Our real nature is more than what we have become. We also have seen that there may be heavy interferences in our life by human and maybe non-human beings. It's hard to say what happens in the subtle dimensions. And this helps to continue our state that we have defined of waking sleep. Now, whether these interferences come from one direction or the other is less of a concern for us now. Because what is really important is, once we realize we are in a mind prison, how do we escape? That is what should really concern us. If we don't feel that we are somehow trapped inside bars, invisible bars in our mind and in our heart, then there's no reason to plan an escape. But if you do, then it makes sense. This is where concepts like the knowledge of ourselves and presence and self-remembering have entered the stage. They cost sacrifices to some noble men to bring them to us in a clear form. So by living more and more in a higher state of consciousness, we start attracting to our life new experiences, new intuitions, new dreams, maybe lucid dreams, because we started to look through the veil of illusion. So we have seen that for the sincere seeker, there are traps that are laid cleverly to block their progress and to give people an artificial sense of satisfaction. So the thirsty soul is made to go in circles, and what it actually does is feeds creatures of other planes. So today we are here to see what we could expect if we find the resolve to move on, discovering ourselves through a conscious effort. At this point, it will be clear that the contents of our mind do not help to awaken. Even talking about important issues or talking about presence in no way guarantees that we are present. So continuing to add content to a container which is already clogged and full of stuff doesn't improve the situation. It's rather the state of the container, in other words, the quality of the observer that we are looking for here. Can we renew our container, which is a metaphor often used in sacred scripts? The mechanics of our psychology, made up of fixed and stereotyped reactions, that is the result of the sleep of consciousness, while the state in which we are aware of ourselves, free to choose our responses to external and internal stimuli, is what transforms each moment into a step towards liberation. What are the consequences of a life spent in that direction? Well, that is something goes beyond a life lived wisely. We could say that based on our worldview, we may expect different things. So if we have an idea that our life is basically the only one, and then we will go back to our maker and that's it, what we may expect is an improvement in things we do from the point of view of knowing why we make choices, knowing why we choose to do something and not something else, the relationship with our neighbor, meaning relatives, family, the closest in the family, of course. We may expect that what used to be our recurring problems fade away, and that thoughts and feelings which haunt us and make us feel miserable fade away and lose their grip on us. So if we pursue the knowledge of ourselves, just focusing on our current lifetime, we may expect a lot of good results in terms of being more real and going beyond the recurring problems, which are normally mostly artificial or serve a purpose that we will talk about later. Of course, if your vision extends beyond the current lifetime, if you expect that you will be here again in the future as a human being that has accumulated wisdom and conscience in previous lives, then you can expect something a lot different. That is, to build something which is stronger than a single lifetime, something which is an immortal core that will carry on through several conscious incarnations. So at that point, you will choose what to do in your next life. You will choose in what conditions to come, and who knows in what place in the universe you might turn up. Many limitations crumble when you develop into a higher form of being. So the possibilities which open to a fully conscious man are far greater than we can imagine. And I mean that. So we can imagine this much. So I could also say, well, try to imagine more. In other words, it's difficult to say from our current situation what we could expect. But it's certainly something extraordinary that is more close to a divine life than a human one. But let's not get ahead of ourselves. That was just to say that you may have great expectations of yourself. It is as if now we are living in the basement, as we said in this metaphor, and the whole house is awaiting our return. There is a very interesting representation of something that they call the ray of creation. That is something that proceeds from a single source, sometimes called the absolute or God or the source, and gradually comes down in layers, getting to our life on earth as the second to last step going down. So imagine that there is an absolute where there is just one law, say the law of love. There is no restrictions, there is no limitations. Then this splits into three parts, sometimes described as a trinity or passive, positive, and balancing force, or in other ways. This is still very far from our situation. And then this moves into a lower realm, which is divided into 6 forces. There are 6 laws. So it's becoming more mechanical. And then this turns into 12 laws, 24, 48. We are in a world of 48 laws according to this description. And below us, there is something which may be considered like an underworld, or in terms from the 4th way, let's say the lunar world. The number 48 means the laws under which we are living. They are a lot, but when you enter certain situations or certain places, you experience what it means to have even more laws that are enforced upon you. For example, during the great crisis of 2020 from the famous virus, we are all given more rules to abide by. You can't do that, you must do it that way. When you meet people, you can't do that. So we experience what it means to have more laws onto us. And it's a very unpleasant feeling. Now imagine having a double number of laws. Probably the closest that I can suggest as an example is when you have a nightmare and you can't move. So I guess we all had a sort of experience of that type, where we are in a situation in a bad dream where our movements are blocked or very slow. So anyway, what I meant to go to is, if we go through this path, we may expect to free ourselves from several of these binds and laws and move towards a higher state where there isn't 48 laws, but maybe 24. For example, in your dreams, when you are in the astral world, you can fly. Gravity doesn't affect you. One law less. Imagine removing 24. How much freedom could you experience? So that is just to give you a hint at what one can expect, not only physically, but also as a being that has a reality and a true life outside of the physical dimension. What happens to people who tread this path? How does their lives evolve from the current situation into the next one? I have known of people, and I have met some people, whose story goes like that. They have an ordinary life, ordinary problems and pains, and at some point there comes a heavy depression. They feel a heaviness that is terrible. And then comes a particular day when something clicks. Maybe the feeling is heavier than usual, and they go to bed, and next morning they wake up and the ego is gone. And all that is left is their presence. I've heard of a few cases like that. And I think if that could happen to everybody, it would be great. But for some reason, it's very limited. So for the ordinary people like me and maybe you, we have to go in smaller steps. By the way, this is longer, of course, takes more effort, but has an advantage, because in doing so, you go in steps and you get to know yourself more and more, because it's by self-observation that you progress. So you get a very thorough and deep understanding of what happens inside of your inner universe. So it is really time well spent. It is worth doing. I will start our little helper now. So every now and then we will get a bell, just to remind us that we should be present, really. Our plan is much less mysterious. So we start from presence. And I hope when I say this, it's a bit of a prompt for everybody to experience a moment of presence, of feeling the observer inside. So when we experience presence, we can then proceed to observing inside what happens, what are our thoughts, what's happening in our body, what are our feelings. And gradually, we develop like a series of snapshots of what is visible inside. This will be a big collection that we make up with time, and little by little, like a spy in enemy territory, we discover who we have become. Because it is important to understand that our current situation is hardly visible for us. The way we are now, it is difficult for us to see what we have become, because of mechanisms that we have mentioned in the past that prevent us from seeing the contradictions in our life, in our psychological life, I mean. So it takes a sustained effort of observation and merciless honesty to see oneself and take note of all the expressions that we create, all the feelings and thoughts that come to our mind, to our heart, and the way we interact with everyone else. So this is the main part of our work at the beginning. And when I say the beginning, it's not the first day. It's gonna be a long time. That is less and less if you work more, but expect that for a few years you will be discovering who you are. And it will be an exhilarating journey. You will find out things that you really didn't expect. Some of them you will realize that you had been told, but you didn't believe it. So it makes sense to, when I said mercilessly honest, because we will see things that we don't like. But the good side is those things are not ourselves. They have attached themselves to us. And our effort now is to detach them and make our light shine again. Another important mainstay of our inner work will be the non-expression of negative states. What do I mean by that? Well, being negative is the easiest thing in the world currently. Being in disagreement or criticizing something is very easy. Expressing our negative thoughts, in turn, is something that comes spontaneously unless we are there. And that's one of the few things which you can try to change without creating an imbalance in your current psychological system. So when I say non-expression of negative states, I mean that we may feel tempted to say, oh, the way that guy walks is really strange. Or, oh, this TV program is horrible. And so on and so forth. Or even criticizing oneself, like, oh, I always do this. I am so distracted. Now, if you reflect on this, there is no actual usefulness in expressing these negative states. But we feel a sort of gratification in doing so. A little part of us, which is not the essence, of course, likes to express this. This becomes part of our sense of identity. Sometimes, not having a clear conception of what we are, we build our identity around these sort of things. Like we become so attached to our pain that we don't even want to stop feeling that pain because that defines what we are. But this, to arrive to such an observation, which may be quite unsettling, it takes a good amount of self-observation. It takes a good amount of honesty, because we are constantly in denial. And we tend to lie to ourselves, that being probably the biggest of our problems. Don't take my word for this. It takes courage and effort to realize how much we lie to ourselves. Once you start seeing that, you may be a bit outraged or disgusted. Don't express that feeling. Make a note of that. If you can avoid accusing yourself, that will be one less problem for you. So we talked about presence, we talked about self-observation and the non-expression of negative states. The other pillar of a work towards our freedom is something that is called, in the fourth way terms, external consideration. I use this strange sounding term because you might be reading books in the future and you may encounter this term. If you come across this, what it means is basically putting yourself in somebody else's shoes before making any opinion or judgment. Just like we tend to act in the only way which is possible based on our mechanical systems inside, at least at the beginning, we may expect that everybody else does as well. So just like we tend to do the only possible thing, similarly, our friends, our neighbors, our husband or wife, they do the only thing that is possible to them in a certain situation. So instead of thinking how wrong it is of her or of him to do that, how offensive those words may be towards me, how he can dare to treat me that way, we should make a sincere effort to put ourselves in the situation of this other person and try to see why she or he feels right, why this is the only thing that was really possible for him at this point. The more you see inside yourselves that we have little choice when we are in a mechanical state, the more we are able to see that in others as well. And that is very liberating, because we don't feel the need to accuse anymore. We don't feel the need to charge people with mistakes we believe they have made. And for every person that we can see with these new eyes, while we see that they really are not guilty, but they are acting like robots in certain moments, we also become free from resentment, from anger, and you start feeling lighter. So this is another important pillar of the path towards our inner freedom. I would like to also add one that is somehow the basis for many others. That is not identifying with the events which happen in our inner world or in the outer world. Not identifying means not permitting that what is happening draws me from a higher to a lower state of consciousness in which my presence is lost. So after 10 minutes, looking back, I realized that yes, that thing happened to me, but I was not there when it happened. I have a question here from Anne. She says, what if it angers me that people are acting like robots? And there is a funny answer, but we will see that later. Well, maybe you've seen that already, right? So, thinking about other people's faults is really pointless. The area where we may have a possibility of change is really what happens on this side. And just as we wouldn't get angry at a little toy that is loaded and then let go, even if that toy has a menacing attitude, who would think of accusing it? It's really pointless. It can only do the single thing for which it was designed. It's a mechanical thing. So in order to understand that the same thing may happen to our husband or son or friend, the only way to arrive at that understanding, not like a concept, but as something I feel that is obvious, is when I see my own mechanical reactions. It is a lot easier to forgive somebody for stealing if we are a thief. So give yourselves the opportunity to look inside, and what somebody else can do, which normally angers you, will become more and more clearly a non-problem for you. It's a problem for him. And I'm sorry for him. But I'm no longer reacting. I'm no longer getting identified in this situation and jumping into a battle that will not give me anything in return. The wise warrior chooses his battles. And this is the type of battle that will lead you nowhere. Well, to be exact, it will make your psychological situation worse, because it will drag you to a lower state of consciousness. It will force your egos to come out. You will start an exchange of accusations, maybe, or saying, oh, yesterday you said that, I know what you think, and things like that. So the only important thing in a confrontation like this is what's happening inside here. What the other person is doing, unfortunately, is something that I cannot help. But if I stop reacting mechanically, eventually this person will change its attitude. Again, don't take my word for it, but try and meet somebody who is normally very bothering for you. But meet this person in presence. Try to see what type of thoughts are trying to come to the fore to give a nasty welcome to this person and dismiss them. See if your different attitude makes a difference in general. Inside of you, it will certainly do. But outside, you may notice that things are changing because you are no longer attracting a confrontation. Let's not think that it's always the other person's fault. These things normally have two actors. Of course, we see the other as the main culprit, and the other will see us. But this is the way mechanical things happen, okay? So the challenge here is to stop pointing the finger and looking that there are three fingers pointing at me. Whoa, will that mean something? I have a remark here. Okay, so Alan, hello Alan. Alan wrote, can you act mechanically loving? Okay. So, love is a much abused word. And sometimes the ego can disguise itself as love. For example, if I become possessive, or if I become a tyrant in my family, I may say, oh, but this is because I love you. So, love takes a real meaning when it's done out of your essence. All the rest may easily fall into one of two categories. It's instinctive love, for example, towards a small child or a pet, because we feel tenderness. So we tend to protect this creature. And this is wonderful, but doesn't need your awareness to be there. And then there is something which is called love, but is coming from our personality, from our ego. So that is just tagged as love, but not being conscious is just, let's say, a mechanical version of it. It's like the love of two actors on the stage. Looks like it, but it's not. Something from Sean. He said, and if you're anything like me, it gets really freaky when you watch yourself acting like a robot. Sean, this is the fundamental thing that we all should keep in mind. So the first robot we should notice is the one that is moving us. And before we do that, everybody else will look like robots mindless people, stupid people, etc., etc. So that is exactly the effort we must make. First of all, if we really need to be outraged at something, that is our own mechanicalness. Everything else will become clearer afterwards. Sandra wrote that she's been attacked yesterday by some robot-like girls for not wearing a mask in the subway. It was very unpleasant, but a good lesson. Okay. And she liked the toy metaphor. Yeah, thank you. Yeah, thank you for sharing your experience. Say that I am a person who has no idea whatsoever of my mission in life or what I am or what I need to do. Then I will look for something to give me identity. A crisis like this, with its new rules, can turn me into a matrix agent, an enforcer of some new meaningless rule, which gives me a sense of identity. Oh, now I am a face mask police. And like everything which is done out of mechanicalness, it is very stark, very merciless. It has no understanding. So you may expect that if somebody has a role of law enforcement, for example, this will amplify certain attitudes of this person. So if somebody likes to beat people and he gets given the opportunity to do so legally in the middle of a crowd, this person will beat twice as much as a different person that doesn't like to beat people. But you give him a stick, you tell him that is your mission, he will be merciless, he will be terrible. So when consciousness enters this, I would expect a completely different behavior. Well, probably if your consciousness acts early enough, you wouldn't want to enter such a role. But if you are in this situation, you wake up for 5 minutes and you find yourself as a riot police officer, you would be a lot more considerate. You would know when to use your stick and when not to do that. But considering that most of us normally are in a state of sleep, then you can expect a lot of disasters. Okay. Anne is making a very honest remark. She says, Sean, yes, it's a disturbing show to look at our own mechanicalness. And don't judge yourself. Consider that all of these horrible mechanisms moving inside, they are not really you. So be very merciful with yourself. Just observe them. Shine your light even more when they appear. They will gradually melt and they will stop disturbing. Super freaky if you find yourself doing it. Yeah, well, consider that a big achievement, because maybe until yesterday you were not there to see it. Now you are. So being there is really the fundamental thing. And what you see is just a bitter, sour pill that you're eating and taking down. That's the medicine of the wise man. Seeing yourself without internal chatter and comment, and just acknowledging this is happening inside of me. That's the pill, say the red pill, which will cure a lot of your illnesses. We also have a nice remark from Johan. A crisis like this can also bring people closer to nature, because they are forced to act less like a robot and come more in touch with what matters more. Yes, I agree. Thank you, Johan. I see we have Johnny coming up. Hello, Johnny. Welcome on board. Now, I'd like to show you something by sharing the screen. A couple of clips I've taken from two very different movies. What they have in common is the presence of a lion, maybe not in the way you expect. So let me open this clip. Anche questo è Riccardo Cordileone. Okay. So the first one comes from a movie from 1938, if I remember well. It's called The Adventures of Robin Hood. One of the first movies in Technicolor. This is just a small scene, like 2 minutes. You may know the story. England was ruled by a tyrant, an usurper, which was Prince John, while the true king, Richard the Lionheart, had been abroad fighting wars and crusades for a long time. Robin Hood was one of the few loyal to the real king. And this is the moment where they discover that the king had come back to England, but they don't know where he is. Okay, let's go.
Right. Right, what's happened to you? Take me to Robin, quick. What is it? What's happened? King Richard's in England. In Sherwood. Sherwood? Yes, Prince John sent Dick into the Kent Road Tavern last night to kill the king. Will, take 50 men at once. Go to the Kent Road Tavern. Master, no need. I headed Dick in off. He ain't gonna murder no one no more. But the king, where is he? I don't know, Master. Ned, Richard must be found. He must be found and brought here for safety. Little John, make a party and scour the countryside. Right attack into the town. Will, search every inn and cottage. Don't rest any of you day or night until he's found. Understand?
We don't need to search for Richard, Robin. He's in good hands. The best in England.
What do you mean? Where is he?
Here. All these have remained loyal. Rise, Sir Robin. Rise, men of Sherwood.
Try to treasure the feelings that these images can trigger inside of you. You may have perceived some feelings inside of you. Please try to remember them, because this is one of those scenes which have a very archetypal type of value. An archetype is one of those images where in whichever part of the world or whichever period you go, you will find them as part of the human psychology. And the king, which is hidden, revealing himself, is a strong archetypal image. By the way, you may find this movie if you look for it. It's almost 80 years old, so it's no longer under copyright. Let me show you something else. Audio was good, was it? So-so? Okay, let's see. Was as loud as I could make it. Let's hope this one is better. By the way, these images may elicit strong emotion, and it's a higher emotion, believe me. So if you feel that some tears are coming, don't stop them. They're very precious. Here we go.
That's not my father. It's just my reflection.
No. You see, he lives in you.
Father?
Simba, you have forgotten me.
No. How could I?
You have forgotten who you are, so forgotten me. Look inside yourself, Simba. You are more than what you have become. You must take your place in the circle of life.
How can I go back? I'm not who I used to be.
Remember who you are. You are my son, and the one true king. Remember who you are.
No, please, don't leave me. Father, don't leave me.
Remember who you are.
Remember who you are, Simba. It's quite a powerful image. And it's easy to read between the lines and see that sometimes one of these movies can really pierce through the armor of selfishness and our personality and touch a deep chord in our hearts. I see a chat here. Okay. The second one, of course, was The Lion King. It's a movie by Walt Disney from 1998, I think. It's the first version. There was another one later, probably last year. I haven't watched this latter one, but the first one, as you can see, contains some very nice parts. I'd like to translate all the ideas that we have expressed so far in theory. Oh, sorry, I see somebody here. Oh, yeah, thank you, Johnny. It's nice to have you here. I think everybody can see you when you wave your hand. Why don't you say hi to everybody? Take a minute to greet us, as it's the first time you are here with us. Thank you.
Yeah, I'm really late. I'm sorry. I just lost the time here. I'm in central United States, and I got a little bit crossed up on the timing here. I would have been here when this started, but it just dawned on me that it was earlier in the day and not later. and I checked it, but ended up coming up late. So sorry about that, but I've watched all of the previous recordings so far, so I'm pretty familiar with your faces already.
Thank you. So we are like old friends. Thank you.
Anyway, good to be here. Thank you.
Okay. So as I was saying, I'd like to now translate those concepts, that is the steps through which we might pass if we practice our presence and self-observation. What would we expect in our life? Is there any change? Well, first of all, we see that we gradually stop accusing the others or the destiny for the damage which really we inflict to ourselves. Therefore, our relationships lose their mechanical friction, which is a result of egos hitting each other. You become more flexible and able to not take very seriously things which may otherwise offend your old self. You may compare this to jiu-jitsu sometimes, or to a more quantum physicist's image, that is, instead of a particle which may be hit hard, you become a wave which is everywhere and can't be hit at all. Whatever the image you choose, let's say that you may expect to become more wise in your relationships, to not hold a grudge for past things, and when some thought comes that would like to revive in you an old accusation you have for somebody, you realize that this is just rubbish, and you easily detach yourself from it. You brighten your light and you let it vanish and fade into nothingness again. Another consequence is we become less of a trouble for who is around us, because we complain less and less about every little thing which doesn't satisfy our expectations. This will make life easier for whoever is around us, but mainly is a progress for ourselves, because every time we lend our voice to the... Oops, we have a microphone there. Can you please close your microphones if you're not speaking? Thank you. So every time we give our voice to one of those bad old feelings and thoughts, we are reinforcing that part of our mechanical personality. So it will have more strength and will look for more opportunities to come afloat. Instead, if we claim our presence and our bright light of essence shines when this thing comes afloat, it will be easier for us to not be engulfed by it, but keep this healthy distance, which is the difference from being identified when it gets you and you stop feeling yourself, and when you are present, so you keep the power to decide how to proceed. Will I take it onto myself? Will I let it go? Or will I fight it actively? That may be an extreme case. Normally, we just want to detach ourselves from it. Another consequence is we might feel less compelled to sing our psychological song every time it is summoned. What is the psychological song? It is that story about ourselves that we like so much to tell, that whenever there is an opportunity, a little association, somebody says a word, like they say, oh yeah, that was the army that said that. That word enters and I say, the army, yeah, you know, when I was in the army, and I tell all my story. And even if nobody wants to hear that, I'll tell it all the way. because that reinforces my artificial sense of identity. And I want to point out how much I suffered, how much I could endure and resist, the clever things that I said, the brutality that I endured, etc., etc. So it's a way to paint myself in a certain way. Whenever there is an opportunity, I will say that. Now, this is called a psychological song. We tend to have one, and it's not necessarily something that paints us as a great person. It may be something else, but its character is, it's compulsive, it's repetitive, and it serves a purpose to reinforce our main trait, which in other words is the main character of our artificial self, which is personality of the whole of our egos. In general, the overall hypnotic spell that life has upon us starts cracking. So if we are representing this hypnotic situation like a shell in which we are trapped, the shell starts cracking, and sometimes a beam of light comes in. More and more we find ourselves present, and we have a freedom of choice for a moment, or let's say for as long as we can maintain a state of presence, instead of being a puppet of one of our egos that makes us say that thing again, feel that feeling again, etc. There is an interesting metaphor in South America, in the Guarani culture, where they say that we often are the devil's guitar, meaning that the devil inside of us can play us like an instrument, just pulling a certain chord, that is injecting a certain memory in our brain that will elicit a certain response, say mechanical response, which is better to call a reaction really. And people who know us can easily drive us into acceleration or depression by just saying that particular sentence that they know will trigger our mechanical reaction. So that's why a musical instrument has no will of itself. It will just do what you decide based on the chords you play, if it's a guitar, okay? So that's why this metaphor is pretty fitting and appropriate. There is another important consequence of going through a path of self-realization, and that is when we suffer, that's because we intentionally choose to do so, because we are willing to achieve something. Suffering in this particular meaning is the choice not to do what our mechanical attitude would push us to do. The resistance against our bad habits. That is a form of intentional suffering, and is the one that can bring us some benefits. Many other forms of suffering are absolutely useful only for your ego. So, for example, if we like to think of something terrible that happened to us 10 years ago, for some reason, we always bring that memory back, and it makes us suffer like hell for 10 minutes, then goes away. Then we call that again later on, or maybe tomorrow. So that type of suffering has no usefulness whatsoever for our soul. Instead, it makes us sicker. So all of a sudden, when we are able to elicit our presence and become here and now, so to speak, we have the choice to resist to our ingrained mechanical habits and put up a proper, useful, noble fight. It's not easy. And at the beginning, all that it brings us is the realization that we are unable to stop those habits. Knowing that is knowing a lot, because we tend to live in the illusion that if only I wanted, I could change this. I could stop smoking, I could stop drinking, I could be funnier, I could be more understanding towards people. These are lies. But in order to see them for what they are, we need to try and stop them. So if I try and I fail, I start to see something true. That is, I can't. Yet, all of this, each time I try and each time I observe something happening, I may discover what is the mechanism through which I am overpowered by my habits. So the first time, I will hardly notice the habit. The second time, I start seeing that. The third time, I may put up an idea, maybe I could stop it, and then I forget about myself and it goes on just like usual. The fourth time, maybe we say to ourselves, no, I want to really stop it. And we will try for 3 seconds and then fall into sleep, and it will happen anyway. And then little by little, if we hold the ground, if we gain inch by inch our new territory, we may arrive to a point where we can actually do something. This is very different from several schools where you're told that with 3 easy lessons, you will change completely. I don't deny that you may look different if you do certain things or affirmations, and you're welcome to do that and see what that does for you. But after you look into yourself honestly and make a sustained effort to be present, you will notice that certain changes are just a facade. They're just a lick of paint onto your existing situation. And you may change something not knowing that this will trigger another change, which is pretty unpleasant, because everything is connected in our psychology. And you can't pull a lever without knowing what will happen in the main factory, to use a metaphor. So the opportunity to use our suffering for a good purpose, maybe for the first time in our lives, and gradually dismissing the mechanical suffering, which may have a function for the ego. For example, as we said, to be the core of our fake identity. So this is a new superpower that you achieve little by little. You can't throw cobwebs like Spider-Man. Maybe you can't have X-ray vision, but you have a better vision. That is looking inside. I don't know if Superman has that really, but you may. I have a message here in the chat. Judith said, who would I be without my story? See how much your story means for you, how you feel when you tell your story. That is an important lesson. And Johan added, there should be a meaning in the suffering. Absolutely. A purpose, a meaning, a way to turn suffering into something new and beautiful. For a diamond to be born, it takes a huge amount of pressure and heat in the depths of earth. Now consider yourself as a diamond in the making. The pressure and the heat are a metaphor for the difficulties in our life. And the final result is a beautiful jewel that is able to spread light and cause amazement. This is one of the metaphors for a being that has realized themselves. Another one is a a star. A star is not born overnight. It takes quite an effort. And if you study the process through which a star is born, you will see that in some way it takes a lot of suffering. But see the result. What can a star do for its planets? Basically everything. So if you turn into a star, what can you do for those around you? You can give light without asking anything in exchange. You can nurture life. There's no end of benefits for those who are revolving around a fully developed star. I wanted to mention something that may have happened to people we know. So what is the role of difficulties in our lives? As we mentioned sometimes, we can turn a difficulty into an opportunity. And really, most of the times, that is within our reach. There are some extreme situations where that may not seem very reasonable as an hypothesis or as an explanation. For example, say you end up in a battle. You have been recruited as a soldier and you are in a war. And you have to kill or be killed. Then, of course, it's difficult to subtract yourself from this situation. And you may have been born in a particular historical moment where you had no escape. There is an interesting remark that was made that if by disgrace someone happens to kill a person, they may lose their soul, or they may lose their ability to contact their soul. This is an explanation for the strange interviews you sometimes see with people who have been at war, and they say, oh, it was very difficult, but after I first shot that soldier, all the rest seemed like nothing. As if there is a threshold beyond which a soldier or a person can go, and there is a before and an after. So that is a very extreme case, and it may be that for this person, there is little that can be done in this particular lifetime. I think it's no coincidence that often soldiers or former soldiers undergo depression or they take their own lives. It is something that we should try to avoid at all costs, naturally. If I was asked to join the army, I would do all that I can in order to be maybe in a technical corps, or to be a cook, or to clean the toilets, whatever that can keep me away from that scenario. It is just an extreme case, but I thought I would mention that because when we see somebody in their eyes, we may get a glimpse of what's happening inside. What is the soul doing? And sometimes they look empty and there seems to be no life inside. So please consider that there is a possibility that sometimes there isn't a soul living there. This is not an invitation to try and point out people to say, oh, that one, he's soulless, I'm sure. This is again our ego coming up. There is a school somewhere that had made a sport out of spotting the agents of the matrix. Don't fall for that trap. When we become judgmental and that becomes our sport, then we are letting our ego feed itself. So this is by no means an invitation to start looking at other with the intention of spotting an ego or a soulless human or something like that. This is just an invitation to notice what happens when you look somebody and you see eye to eye. And also notice when somebody refuses to see with you eye to eye, or a person wears black sunglasses, even though it's not necessary because it's a cloudy day. What's happening to that person? Well, sorry to say that's her problem or his problem, but you may have a way to read through the lines and understand that your eyes, and really everybody's eyes, they are a gateway into somebody's soul. As a way to turn this psychological jiu-jitsu, the ability to transform a difficulty into an opportunity, to turn this into a form of art, somebody suggested an interesting technique or metaphor. That is, I will take the 12 people that have made my life the most difficult, miserable, impossible, and I will write their names down as my 12 apostles. And inside of me, I will consider that there is a Jesus that is trying to incarnate the Christ. And I will not try to avoid these 12. Instead, I will try to be present when I interact with them and transform what used to be a horrible relationship into a red pill that I eat every time. And those apostles will, of course, help me in my path towards incarnation of something higher. I mentioned the word Christ, and I don't mean to say a particular person. There are very important traditions, like the ancient Gnostic tradition, which state that the Christ is a cosmic force that we may choose to incarnate inside. And that will transform us into a higher sort of being. You will find a lot of metaphors around this. Just like you may find strange sentences in the Bible or in the Gospels, where there is a mention to somebody dying. If that somebody is a metaphor for an ego, then it's a lot easier to understand what you're reading. If that somebody is brought in the presence of Christ and is dissolved, or in a worse translation, dies, it may be that the Christ with its light has dissolved this ego. So be mindful that there is a lot of metaphoric layers between you and the core contents of some sacred scripts. And we may be tempted to read them literally, but they were written by initiates for initiates. So our pretension to interpret them easily is not justified. We have extended ourselves a bit beyond the hour. I hope it's not a problem, but of course, if somebody needs to go, they can watch the recording later. I see a few chats here. Yeah, I see that there is a comparison of these mechanical figures inside and outside of us with Castaneda's petite tyrants. Castaneda has got a lot of things right in his books. So thank you for this remark, Johan. And Eduardo said it's a sort of this is a hard word pronounced, conscientious objection. That is when you are drawn into the military, but you don't want to kill. So of course, there are ways we can try to reduce the probability that we will have to do something like that. And we should do all we can in order to keep ourselves from hurting somebody. At this point, I'd like to launch an idea. When these 7 lectures finish, the, let's say, information part of our work here will have ended. And I will propose to those who are willing to continue to have a different sort of meetings weekly, which are less of an information type thing and more of a work. That is, you've read the manual, would you like to make use of it? Now, this is an open invitation. Think about that, but more than thinking, try to feel about that. In case you think this might be interesting, even if you're not sure, may I suggest that you get yourself a notebook and you write something titled My Self-Portrait as of June 2020. That is, the way I see myself, I think about myself, I consider myself at this point in my life. This is not something that you need to share. This is for your own use, so that in 5 or 10 or 20 years, you will get what your starting point was. If you can, I would suggest that you don't do this on a computer, but on a proper notebook made of paper. And this is because on paper, there is something more than the keys you type. There is your own writing. Also because no hacker can ever hack your notebook if it's made of paper. That is a secondary thing. And if you do so, please, when you make something you consider a typo or a mistake, don't erase it. Leave it where it is. Just underline it and go on writing what you really wanted to write. This is out of experience because I have noticed that when I write something about, especially about myself, words and whole sentences that come out and then I consider, oh no, that's wrong. They were telling me something very important. It's just that I prefer to deny it. So, trust your mistakes. They are telling you something. As we are nearing the end of our lecture today, I will just suggest that if you have more questions, you just speak up. Now it will be very, very nice to hear from you. Beautiful silence. So I suppose we've had a sufficient dose of hopefully good concepts. Anne is asking, what would you like to do in the group? Ah, sì.
Forse aveva capito.
So you're welcome to talk, of course, Anne. What the group would be about is proposing every week a small topic, but mostly leading a work of self-observation in real time. So the big part of the work would be like a suggestion to observe certain things and to make notes of what you find. And of course, you're welcome to share something if you would like. But mostly it would be a guided group reciprocal help for self-observation, while introducing gradually some topics from the fourth way psychology, which are a bit more advanced. So it would be like a friendly meeting, less formal, less of a lecture, but more on being there, observing what happens inside, and why not sharing some interesting observations as much as you feel like. So that would be because in order to get something out of this sort of work, there needs to be continuity. So what you have seen and you will see in these 7 weeks have probably been like little flashes of consciousness inside yourselves and concepts which may have triggered your interest and your attention. But that is not inner work. These are just pointers to the inner work. Inner work is something more that goes on for a whole lifetime and sometimes is impossible without some sort of reciprocal help, depending on other conditions, which is outside of what I would like to discuss today. But normally it's a lot easier to do that in a group context, where there are people who have walked on that path to some degree and can share with us things they found out. Because we may recognize the same thing inside ourselves. And then, of course, the main help will come from the inside. When we have an experience that comes from our higher self, like Simba, you have forgotten who you are, we may get a call from the inside in several different ways. Coincidences, synchronicities, a voice in our head, a certain dream, a strong intuition. This is the upper floor calling you. Will you be able to answer? So our idea for the group is to turn these concepts into work. This is an open invitation. I'd like to understand in the next week who will be glad to move on. And when the lecture series ends, we will ask more formally. All right. So, are you scared enough? That's a good sign. It's a good sign because we might get a glimpse of all the things that we don't want to see, but we know they are there. Yes, Eduardo.
Alberto.
Yes.
¿Me escuchas?
Adelante, come in.
Lo puedo hacer en español y luego tú me traduces.
I'm going to translate for Eduardo, so bear with me.
Gracias. Muchas gracias por compartir tu tiempo, por hacer esta invitación. Y bueno, yo creo que va a ser algo así como lo que vimos, lo que platicamos la sesión pasada de abrir los ojos en de esa cara llena de lodo, abrirlos un poquito y bueno, estoy muy contento, muchas gracias. Estoy adentro.
Okay, so apart from thanking for sharing this information, Eduardo is happy that we are going to have an opportunity or further opportunity to open our eyes, get out of our shell of mud in which we are trapped, and get out of that, discovering something real about ourselves. So, thank you for being with us today. This is a good time if there's more questions or just a greeting or anything. Feel free to unmute your microphone.
Muchas gracias to you and your beautiful beloved wife for taking your time and sharing yourselves and your hearts and this knowledge with us as we all dive deep and do the great work of waking up to ourselves and embodying that process. Thank you so much.
You're welcome. You're welcome.
Thank you.
So it looks like we are at the end of our weekly meeting. So I hope we will see you next Saturday. Spend a conscious week as much as you can. Remember yourself and make good use of those rare moments when you do. Don't let them go away too easily. That's worth fighting for. So from myself and from Daniela.
Yeah, a big hug for everyone.
Thank you. Thank you, Daniela. Thank you, Alberto. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
See you.
Bye.
See you.
Bye-bye.
Thanks, guys. Thanks for having me today.
Bye, Johnny. Bye, everybody. Nice to have seen your faces, for some of you for the first time.
Bye-bye.